This is the Value Investor Podcast with Tracey Reineck. All things value, all the time.
Welcome back, value investors. The Nasdaq has once again broken out to new all-time highs, and that has brought out a lot of hand-wringing that this is 1999 all over again. For some reason, whenever it's the Nasdaq, not the S&P 500, the Dow, or the Russell, only when the Nasdaq hits the highs and starts busting out does everyone get all worried about 1999. But along with that 1999 sentiment has been a bunch of articles about us poor value investors that we're all so desperate because there aren't any value stocks out there anymore. And that's like 1999 when there was no value stocks. And remember, also in 1999, when the value investors were kind of down on their luck, let's be honest, we were. But remember, Warren Buffett was also called out by a lot of investors, the media, various people. They called him old, out of touch. And I don't really hear any of that talk today so far. We're only hearing about the desperation of value investors in general. In a prior podcast, I already covered how value investors could still buy the FANG and not feel badly about it. So some of these themes are now running around, but I covered it about 4 months ago. You can find it if you're a subscriber, or if you're on SoundCloud, you can scroll back and see that podcast where I talk about why it's okay to buy them. It's not really a betrayal of your value principles to buy some growth. And, you know, some of these value managers can only buy value stocks. And those are the ones that supposedly are getting a little desperate because they're not in these high-powered FANGs. But I really want to take issue with these articles stating that, you know, we're all desperate and that growth is the only game in town. Well, I like growth too, and I own some of the FANGs, but value is still out there and we're still finding stocks. Obviously, every week on this podcast, I'm giving you stock picks, and some of those have been interesting, even just this year in 2018. So, I took a look at the value investor newsletter that I run here at Zacks just to kind of gauge once again what's going on there. And I have 3 positions that are up more than 100% in that portfolio. There's about 25 names right now, give or take a few. It's around 25. And 2 of them were bought in 2016, and the third one was bought in 2017. So while that's a long-term portfolio, most of the older names have been rotated out now, and a lot of them are slightly newer within the last 2 years, I would say. And even with only the 2 years, there's 3 that are up more than 100%. So all this craziness about, oh, there's no value and, you know, value investors are doomed and they're all, you know, waiting to buy the FANG is not really true. So I brought 5 stocks, some of which have been featured on the podcast before, some quite often, in fact, that are or were value stocks in the last 18 months that you could have bought that are doing quite well here in 2018. And some of them are beating many of the FANG stocks. And remember, the FANGs, I'm including the original FANG, which is Amazon, Netflix, Facebook, Alphabet, and Apple. We'll put the dual A's in there for this FANG. That's what we're comparing it against. So let's take a look at 5 of these stocks that are values that are still outperforming here in 2018. So the first one is the perennial favorite, the one we all know and love, Micron, ticker MU. Of course, I had to bring it back, right? I think it went 1 or 2 podcasts without being mentioned, but here it is again. It is in the value investor portfolio. And, you know, it's just been soaring still. It's up 36% year to date. So let's compare it with those FANG returns. So Netflix is the best performer out of the original FANG. It's up about 82% year to date so far. Amazon is in second, up a little over 40% now. Those are outstanding returns, obviously. But the other FANGs aren't so great here. They're okay, but they're not soaring as much as the media makes it out to be. So Apple still with a good return of 14.2%. I'll take that. And then Facebook 6.4 and Alphabet/Google 5.5. So all of those are beating the S&P 500, but Facebook and Google are actually underperforming the Nasdaq, which is up in double digits now, a little over 10 or 11% here. So they're underperforming that index. And the others, as I said, are doing pretty well here. So Micron up 36%. It's still cheap, trading at 5 times still. So that's the Micron story. So yes, it's in tech. So it's a little bit of a cheat there because everybody's saying anything outside of tech is not doing well, but it's not in the FANG. And yet you're doing quite nicely there. So keep that one in mind. Moving on, our second stock is one that's been also mentioned on this podcast, not as often, but maybe some of you had some guts to get in this one, and it's Macy's, ticker M. So retail was down on its luck into 2017. It looked pretty dismal. Macy's was trading, I think, at like 5 times when I had it on the show. It was like 5 or 7 times. And even still right now, it's trading at 9.6 times, so under 10, and that's pretty rare. The dividend yield when it was at its cheapest was over 8%, and they never cut the dividend, although there was a lot of debate whether or not that was going to be cut, but it wasn't. And it's still yielding 4% right now. But Macy's really is powering higher here in 2018 as the retail story has turned around. It's up 52% year to date. So not too shabby on that one. It's beating all of the FANGs except Netflix. And ironically enough, it's outperforming Amazon. Never thought I'd say that one. But if you bought it very beginning of the year, you are beating the Amazon return. So Macy's getting its revenge in 2018. So they're not crying in their coffee over the FANG. No, not at all. So let's take a look at the third stock. Now, this is a staffing stock, and many of these are doing really, really well. Nobody's paying any attention, but you should be because, again, with unemployment at nearly 20-year lows, super tight job market, and then we just got record number of job openings. So if you can't fill those positions just by putting an ad or searching on LinkedIn, what are you going to do? You're going to hire recruiters. And that is true in 1999, and that is true right now. So the recruiters are getting hired because they can't find the talent and they need someone to search even deeper to find it. So this company, BG Staffing, it's a micro cap. These are really hot right now. So a little bit riskier because it has it's only about 160 million market cap here. BGSF is that ticker. It has a forward P of 13.8, so still a value, even though shares are up over 20% year to date. And again, that's better than most of the FANGs. It's not beating Amazon or Netflix because those are soaring, but it's beating 3 out of the 5 year to date. And you get a very nice dividend of 6.3% yield. I kind of had a look to see if they do that quarterly or is that yearly, but it looks like it's yearly. So BG Staffing, they do a lot of staffing for IT and accounting. But if you're interested in the staffing side, which is really hot right now, then this is one to keep on your list. And turning now to the fourth stock. Now, this is my little cheater stock, kind of, but I had to go back into 2017, which I've done on prior podcasts for this one. So it's Weight Watchers, WTW. But if you had bought it in, early to mid 2017, it had a PE of around 14. And that is when I added it to the value investor, portfolio that I run because it was so cheap. Shares have soared. Earnings are looking really good, but it's no longer technically a value. But I'm including it here because some of you might have bought it after listening to some of the podcasts on it last year. Or you just might have liked it and bought it when it was, quite a bit cheaper. But now it's trading at 27 times, so no longer 14 times. It is much more of a growth stock now. But this one, despite soaring in 2017, it was up triple digits in 2017. It's up 80% year to date right now. Let's just call it about the same as Netflix. So it's about the same as Netflix, and it's beating all the other FANGs. Netflix is trading at 125 times. So compared to Netflix, Weight Watchers is still a bargain at 27 times. So I still like it, still like that business, just not quite as cheap, but those shares are soaring. So if everyone's out there saying, oh, Netflix, and it's the only game in town, well, the Weight Watchers investors would tell you otherwise. And then turning to our fifth stock, this is an area that I've talked about a lot too on various podcasts over the last, I would say 2 years for sure. I've done several podcasts discussing the energy stocks now and what the insiders have been buying. Remember those where I went through like a list of like 20 stocks to see if the insiders were buying the various EMPs, because that's an indication if they do buy the energy that maybe the bottom was in. And yes, the insiders have been buying basically throughout most of the downturn and including in early 2018 of this year. They bought again because these shares slid again. And it's a hated sector. We all know it still is. It's still pretty hated. It's been over 2 years, so it takes a long time for sentiment to turn around about a sector. But crude back up over 60. It was over 70 for a couple weeks there. Now back down to 65. These companies can all make money at $65, especially the EMPs. So as value investors, remember, we like to buy stocks that are out of favor. I know that's hard. It's hard for me too. I look at it and I feel dumb, like nobody else is buying this. And especially if the shares keep sinking or if they stay depressed. That's happened in energy, that's happened in the healthcare stocks, and especially the biotechs. And it's happened in the retailers and to some extent now also in the restaurant chains. So you may own some of those and you're wondering, why am I in this? It stinks. You may question yourself, but in energy, 2018 looks like this is finally the turnaround that a lot of us have been waiting for. We've been patient for it. Some of the other turnarounds turned out to be false, like fake bottoms, basically. But this one with crude back up over 60 looks to be for real. So the fifth stock is Occidental Petroleum, OXY. And this one has been mentioned on the podcast in the past. It's up 15.6% year to date. So once again, it's beating 3 out of the 5 FANG stocks. Occidental's beating Apple for this year. And it's trading with a forward P of 20.7. So that sounds a little more expensive. And I know you're like, that's not really a value, classic value, because it's not under 15 times. But the PEs aren't quite as spot on or relevant in energy just because of the way that the earnings turn around basically when crude and natural gas turns around. So what you need to look at is some of the other fundamentals. Occidental earnings expected to soar 362% this year. They made 89 cents in 2017, expected to make $4.12 in 2018. That's huge. I love the earnings growth. That's oil rising right there. It still pays the dividend. It never cut it. So that's now yielding 3.6. It was nearly 6% at one point at the dark times, nearly 6%. But your patience paid off in this one, and it's now up 15.6% year to date. I still like it even with that gain. So these are 5 stocks that value investors have been buying, like I said, in the last 18 months. So everything hasn't been about the FANG. And now you can see why I'm annoyed at the article saying it's just like 1999, because it's not. There's plenty of value stocks out there. And the biggest gripe against Buffett back then was that he wasn't in tech. Remember, that's why they called him old, out of touch. Oh, he doesn't own Cisco, or he doesn't understand it. Remember, because he said if you can't explain it in 30 seconds to a 7-year-old, then he's not buying it. And he thought that the tech companies were just too confusing. Like, what did Cisco do? He didn't know. So, but here in 2018, what is one of his biggest positions now in Berkshire Hathaway? It's one of the FANGs, of course. It's Apple. So nobody's complaining now that Buffett is, quote, missed out, unquote, because Apple has been a value stock for the last several years, as I've mentioned before. It traded in 2016 at only 12 times, and it was cheaper even a couple years before that. But 2016, just 2 years ago, at 12 times, and now about 17 times. So not quite as cheap as it has been in the past. But so don't worry, value investors, the values are out there. But the question is going to be, do you have the courage to buy it? Will you, skip out on the FANG train to buy the retails, the energies, even the biotechs and some of those healthcare stocks? I didn't even cover those this time, but some of those are starting to look interesting, as that area is much hated as well. I should do a whole podcast on some of the healthcare names, which I will, actually. I should do that. But some of these have momentum. The ones I mentioned, they have been cheap in the past year. Some of them are still cheap now. So let's recap those tickers. So we had Micron, of course, ticker MU. We had Macy's, ticker M, still looks cheap here, even with this big surge in the shares. We had BG Staffing, ticker BGSF. Weight Watchers, not quite as cheap anymore, but still cheap compared to the FANGs. That's WTW. And Occidental Petroleum, OXY. There's a lot of small E&Ps also in energy you should be taking a look at. But keep these in mind. There's always stocks out there, like I said, and no, it's not $19.99. So be sure to subscribe to the Value Investor Podcast. We can be found on Spotify, and I do know that some of you are listening over there now, so that's great. And we're on iTunes and Apple Podcasts, but we're under the Zacks Market Edge name over there. And we're also on SoundCloud under Zacks Market Edge. So you'll get 2 shows for one. If you subscribe over there, you'll get both Market Edge and the Value Investor Podcast. But every week I bring you these value stocks so you don't want to miss a single episode. And I'll see you again next week with some more value stocks.